And it's easy to think that this is all because they came up with the horror gimmick or whatever. Like that was the cheat code to their success. But I actually don't think it's that simple. What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are going to talk about a band that I've been meaning to talk about for quite a while, and that is Ice Nine Kills. Because it's always interesting to look at those bands that kind of just pop up and get success right out of the gate, like from day one. For example, of Mice and Men, whose first song blew up on MySpace and they got signed after being a band for like a couple months. Or Woe Is Me, who I'm pretty sure got signed to Rise before even playing a single show. Again, based purely on MySpace hype. But what's actually far more interesting to me is the opposite of that. Because it's so rare. Those bands that grind for years and years and years with honestly kind of limited success, and then somehow or another they figure it out, hit their stride, and finally have their breakthrough and blow up years and years into their career. And there is maybe no better example of that than Ice Nine Kills, who had their breakthrough moment in 2018, hitting number 29 on Billboard, grossing almost $2 million in merch sales and selling out 2,000 cap venues all over the country. And what's interesting is that a lot of people think of them as a newer band, but actually they were almost 20 years into their career when that happened. So the question is, what exactly did they figure out that enabled them to have that breakthrough moment? How did they go from their humble beginnings as a ska band from the North Shore of Boston to what they are now, one of the most innovative bands in metalcore with a thriving business? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. But first, I wanted to mention that I am now on Twitch. I'm streaming twice a week. I've also got a Discord that's up to over 4,000 members now. There's links to both of those in the description of this video. And I should thank Spencer from Ice Nine Kills and their manager Mike Mowry for their help in putting this video together. But first, I'd like to thank Cove for sponsoring this video and sending me their new split speaker to check out. It connects to smartphones, tablets, and computers via Bluetooth 4.2. I paired it with my iPhone in like 15 seconds. It was super easy. And it operates for up to 7 hours on a single battery charge. And you can leave it like this, or you can split it up into two halves here for like a wider stereo image, which is why they call it the split speaker. And I honestly think this thing sounds really good, especially the low end, because it actually has a subwoofer. Yes, a subwoofer in a portable speaker. You heard me right. It also has a built-in microphone for hands-free calling. For those of us who spend a lot of time in Zoom, you can use it for that if you want. And the Cove Bluetooth speaker system even has a water-resistant rating of IPX7. So if you want to take those Zoom calls from the side of your hot tub or whatever, you can do that without having to worry. So if you want to check out the Cove speaker, they've got a great offer just for viewers of my channel. Hit the link in the description of this video to get 67% off the Cove split speaker. Just use the code ROCK67 at checkout.
Ladies and gentlemen, our musical guest, Ice Nine.
And to answer those questions, let's step back to the very beginning. Ice Nine Kills started way back in 2000 under the name Ice Nine. And believe it or not, they sounded like a completely different band back then. They were more of like a pop punk ska kind of band along the lines of like Homegrown.
Saturday was another day, just the other day, when I heard somebody say, do you remember way back when the day when life was still our
But the band as we know it really came together in 2006 when they changed the name to Ice Nine Kills and self-released their first album called Last Chance To Make Amends.
Here goes the story of a kid we thought we knew.
And they followed that up with an EP called The Burning in 2008, which was really kind of the first taste of the modern Ice Nine Kills sound that you would know today. It's definitely a bit rough around the edges, but still you can kind of hear the beginnings of that theatrical, over-the-top, pop-tinged metalcore kind of sound that they're still doing today.
How can this happen? Am I dreaming again? Her body's not moving, I'm assuming she's dead.
And to be totally honest, I do remember the band from back then, but I really didn't pay a lot of attention to them. But what I do remember is that they were kind of constantly in the background of the scene. They were slowly but surely climbing up the industry ladder, going from that local band to then touring with national bands like Eyes Set to Kill and I See Stars, and then graduating to the next level of doing the big festival tours like Warped Tour and Taste of Chaos. And what really defined the band during this era is that they were putting in the work. Like, they essentially crashed Warped Tour one year. They weren't actually booked on the tour, but they followed it around, playing shows around it here and there, and doing that kind of common thing back then of selling CDs to kids in the parking lot waiting to get in, which is kind of a funny, like, desperate thing to do on one hand, but on the other hand, I think you have to respect how seriously they took it. Like, Spencer told me he set a minimum quota for himself of selling 200 CDs a day, which I think is kind of a lot, and they actually ended up selling over 10,000 CDs on Warped Tour that year, which for a band of that size is a lot of fucking albums. Like, if they actually were able to sound scan those, they probably would have charted based on that. Next, they put out their second album, Safe as Just a Shadow, in 2010 on a kind of small indie label called Red Blue Records. And pretty much just continued the grind, doing, you know, all the things that an up-and-coming band does, and slowly but surely making progress, stacking up more of those like small wins, but still it kind of felt like it was one step forward, two steps back for them. Like one of those bands that's just cursed. Spencer told me about one of the lowest points of the band around this time. They had finally started to get on the radar of Rise, which, as a lot of you guys remember, was like the hottest name in metalcore at the time, to the point where they were in talks to sign with Rise, which was like the biggest thing that a band in their genre could possibly do, right? I mean, this would have just massively changed the trajectory of the band. But for whatever reason, Rise changed their mind and that offer never came. And then shortly after that, they also got dropped by their management company, Artery. Like two crushing blows, one right after the other. And from the outside, if you were to take a snapshot of the band at this time, basically all signs were that this was a failed band and they should probably just quit. Like, hey guys, no shame, you gave it the best you had, but I just think this is not going to work out. You guys should probably just go get day jobs or something. I don't think you're cut out for this. That's what I would have said if somebody asked me anyway. But Spencer had a vision. He stuck to that vision, and slowly but surely it paid off. The first big inflection point was that they signed with Outer Loop Management, who were kind of the hottest managers at the time in that genre. They had like Periphery, Veil of Maya, We Came as Romans, Darkest Hour, and like literally dozens of other bands that you would know. And on the back of that, they also signed with Outer Loop Records, which was an imprint of Fearless. And this was the foothold that they needed to kind of break out of that struggling opening band kind of territory where so many bands of that era just kind of got stuck. It's like quicksand for your career. And they had finally made it out. They put out their third album, The Predatory Becomes Prey, in 2014, which was their first album to crack the Billboard Top 200, and sonically was definitely a step up from anything else they had done before. But still, if I'm being completely honest, they just didn't really stand out from the pack to me.
Every single thing I promised you, I followed through, and just like a pawn would.
There was nothing wrong with what they were doing, but at the same time, there was nothing especially right about it either. Like nothing to separate them from that just giant, massive sea of metalcore bands going around back then. Especially compared to the biggest bands of that era, the ones that I like to call boy bands with breakdowns like Of Mice and Men, Asking Alexandria, and Bring Me the Horizon, for example, who had all blown up on MySpace based on essentially having like a cute frontman that all the scene girls liked, and had now ascended to the status of like actual Billboard Top 10 rock bands, despite the fact that they were about 10 years younger than Ice Nine Kills. And so if you kind of zoom out here, in spite of the fact that this was the most successful they'd ever been in their career, the band wasn't a failure by any means, but they were really just kind of middle of the pack at best. And remember, by the time Predator came out, they were halfway into their second decade as a band. So if you showed me a snapshot of their career in 2014, and you told me that 7 years later in 2021, they would be in the Billboard Top 30, selling millions and millions of dollars of merch a year, I would have said you were insane. But all that was about to change. To me, the actual turning point for their career where they kind of really figured it out was their 2015 album, Every Trick in the Book, which wasn't their breakthrough album, but was kind of the template or the foundation for the album that would be their breakthrough.
Their early work was a little bit too scene for me, but when the Silver Screen came out, I think they really came into their own, commercially and artistically.
It was a concept album, which, like you can kind of tell from the title, every song was based on a different book, like Animal Farm, Romeo and Juliet, some other classics, and then also some horror novels like Carrie and The Exorcist. It was musically their best album to date and also the most commercially successful. It was their first album on Fearless, so it was a real step up in terms of their industry profile or their brand. It went to number 122 on the Billboard Top 200, number 1 on Heatseekers, and number 4 on the independent chart. And yet still, the industry kind of didn't really recognize it. Here they were, clearly having the most success of their career, but they were still struggling to get on bigger tours, to get those real A-list press opportunities, because the industry just kind of thought they were a shot band. And I admit, I was one of those people, like, oh, these guys have been around for 15 years, the album's pretty good, but I don't see this band ever breaking out of that kind of like 400 cap venue kind of circuit. They're done. And so here they were, 15 years into their career, they're in their 30s at this point, still touring in a van, still sleeping in the parking lot of Walmart every night. Which also explains a lot of the lineup changes around this time. Like, can you really blame anybody for saying, you know what? I love this band, it's been cool, but I'm 30 years old, I don't think I can do this anymore, I'm gonna go get a day job. And that's just kind of the reality of it. It's tough, it's unfair, but that's just the way the industry works. If they smell blood in the water, you just kind of get marked as a shot band, and that's that. Nobody will touch you. And I'll be honest, that's what I thought too. I've known their manager for a long time, and I saw him working so hard for them, and I just thought, why? Why are you investing so much of your time and energy into this band? They're clearly never gonna break out of this kind of middle of the pack lane that they've been in for the past decade. Why do you care so much about this band? Well, as any fan of the band knows, they answered that question with their next album. Their big breakthrough came in 2018, almost 20 years into their career, with the release of their 6th album, The Silver Scream, which was basically the same kind of formula as Every Trick in the Book, but instead of being about books, every song was inspired by a different classic horror movie. Halloween, Friday the 13th, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, It, and so on. And honestly, I was shocked to see how well this album did. It hit number 29 on Billboard, number 4 on the top rock albums, and it put them over 1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. And it was cool to see, finally after 20 years of grinding, they did it. They made it into, the metalcore big leagues. And it's easy to think that this is all because they came up with the horror gimmick or whatever. That was the cheat code to their success. But I actually don't think it's that simple. And let's break that down in detail. For one, I would say that on just a purely musical level, this is the first time that the production lived up to the music. Gotta give a shout out there to their producers Drew Folk and Jeff Dunn, who are both amazing producers and mixers, and took the presentation of their music to a level that it had never been at before. Although I do want to note that their old producer Steve Sopchak was and is still a key part of the writing process, and that they're still very close friends with most of the people who used to be in the band. I think there's kind of this idea that it's been some super messy, contentious process over the years with the changes to the lineup and their team and stuff, and I don't really think that's the case. But with all that being said, I do think that the horror tie-in was, of course, a big part of the success. The reason why Every Trick in the Book didn't blow up like The Silver Scream did is very simple, right? Yes, everybody knows the books that they were referencing on that album, but Romeo and Juliet is not exactly metal. So it's not as simple as just doing a concept album about something that's well known and popular. For example, if you did a metalcore album about Formula One racing, Formula One is huge. I think it's one of the most popular sports in the world, but obviously it doesn't really cross over with metal. Whereas with horror, if you're watching 80s slasher movies like Friday the 13th or whatever, there's a pretty good chance that you also like metal. And beyond that, I think there's a lot of cultural similarities between the two fandoms. For example, they both have a culture of collecting physical objects like vinyl and toys and merch and comics and stuff like that. They're both into attending live events, whether that's conventions or shows or movies, these kind of community gathering sort of tentpole events. And what all that adds up to is that for both horror and metal fans, it's oftentimes their whole identity and lifestyle, which makes them an ideal audience from a marketing perspective. It's part of the culture to obsessively buy everything that your favorite creators put out. It's a marketer's dream come true. But again, I want to be clear, it's more than just writing a few songs about some old movies and then poof, your band's gonna blow up. It's much more than that. I think of it as this is where Spencer's really larger vision for Ice Nine Kills finally came to life. when he started to think of the band as more than just music. It's more like a larger entertainment lifestyle kind of brand that's centered on music, but is more than just music. I talked about this with Odd Future. They kind of did the same thing, and you can see how well it works. For one, we've got to talk about their videos. Their videos had always been certainly much better than average, but this is where they really took them to the next level. The one that really stood out for me was The American Nightmare, which is based on the 80s movie Nightmare on Elm Street.
The American nightmare with American dreams.
A movie that was a huge cultural event for people my age. Even me, as not really a particularly big horror fan, I have a lot of nostalgia for that movie. And this video really does it justice in a way that's kind of hard to describe, you know? A lot of their bands say that they think of their videos as mini movies, but really what that means is they just put a long, dumb intro on there and spent too much money on effects that kind of didn't really add anything. But that's really what this video feels like. It really does feel like its own little mini movie. And the reason why Ice Nine pulled that off in a way that so many other bands fail to really just comes down to attention to detail. I'm skipping ahead a little bit here in the timeline, but a great example of that to me is their newest video, Funeral Derangements. Which is based on the book and movie Pet Sematary by Stephen King. If you remember the little kid in that movie who got hit and killed by a truck and then brought back to life, they got the actor Miko Hughes, who played that kid in Pet Sematary. In their video, they got him to play a truck driver who hits and kills a kid, kind of like killing his own character from Pet Sematary. Anybody can throw some half-assed horror movie references in a video, but that kind of attention to detail is just really next level. That's the kind of thing that shows horror fans that okay, these guys are truly students of the game. These guys are part of horror culture just as much as they are a metal band. And obviously, anytime you can activate two fan bases like that, that's an incredibly powerful marketing tool. Another thing that they really nailed on this album was the features. They got people from Finch, Mest, Less Than Jake, Matt from Trivium. They even got the original actor who played Jason in Friday the 13th to be on the album. Pretty impressive lineup there. And one thing I noticed here that was really smart, I don't know if it was deliberate, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. These are all bigger, credible bands, which of course helps legitimize it, but more importantly, they're all from kind of outside Ice Nine's actual genre, which just kind of makes them inherently interesting. Wait a minute, that metalcore band Ice Nine Kills did a song with the guy from Real Big Fish? What?
For this last one, I need you to help welcome to the stage Matt and Johnny from Real Big Fish!
Which in turn drives a lot of press coverage that they probably wouldn't get if this was just a feature from another metalcore band. Again, it's that attention to detail that's the difference between just okay and exceptional. And speaking of which, we've also got to talk about their merch, which again, they took to a whole other level around this time. I could almost make a whole video just about this because I really can't think of any other band that does merch better than they do. Basically, they took the idea of what streetwear brands like Supreme or the Hundreds did with streetwear and applied it to their merch with monthly themed drops called Nightmare on the 9th because it comes out the 9th of every month, which again, they just executed on a whole other level than pretty much anybody else in their genre. For example, they did one about the movie Jaws, the killer shark movie, which is more than just a bunch of screen printed t-shirts. They have some really unique items like this fully printed souvenir beach towel. And they also put out this really clever, funny little mini documentary to kind of build out the story around the drop.
Hey, what's up? I'm Ricky from Ice Nine Kills, and this fucking hunk over here is my father. Today we're going to talk about how he acquired one of the harpoons that they used in the original 1975 Jaws.
Again, the idea of doing drops, there's plenty of other bands that do that, but is there anybody that puts this much effort into the craft and storytelling around it to really make that drop feel special and interesting and unique and okay, I've got to get this? I also want to give a shout out to my friend Mike Cortada for designing all this stuff. You may know him from doing amazing artwork for bands like A Day to Remember, Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, and a ton of other bands in the kind of Warped Tour world. And this isn't just cool stuff for the sake of making cool stuff. This is a legitimately great business for them. In 2019 alone, they grossed almost $2 million in merch sales, and I would be willing to bet that that number is a lot higher this year. According to this article, their June 2019 drop sold 3,500 units in just 4 days and grossed $130,000. That's no joke. They also launched an app, I think in 2019, 2020.
Ice Nine Kills presents the Psychos Only app. This is your chance to find out everything about Ice 9 Kills in one place.
Which is kind of a cool way of bringing their community together on this platform that's free of all the toxic bullshit that you see on most social media. They're just constantly ahead of the curve and executing better than anybody else. And I think really that's the common thread here. It really just comes down to how well do you execute. Yes, they had a smart idea as far as like pivoting to the horror theme for the band, but ideas are easy. You know, everybody's got a fucking idea. They're not really worth much. What impresses me is the details, like how well they executed on all those ideas, which is where the value of experience really comes into play. Like on the one hand, you could say that, yeah, they spent 10 or 15 years kind of grinding it out for nothing on the road, living in a van, but is that true? Or were those years exactly what enabled them to be as successful as they are now? Like all the things that they learned grinding it out in a van, playing to 42 people in South Dakota or whatever, slinging CDs in the hot sun to kids in the line at Warped Tour, all that stuff. All of that is what gave them the skills, experience, work ethic, and industry connections that led to this moment, to this breakthrough success. Which brings us to the present day, 2021. I'm filming this 3 days after the release of The Silver Scream 2, which in my personal opinion, and I'm obviously biased, but I think this is the best thing that they have ever done by a mile. And it's too early to know more right now as far as where it's going to chart and all that stuff, but what I can say is that as of right now, it's the #1 rock and metal album on iTunes. It's the #4 overall album after Kelly Clarkson. It's #1 on Amazon Digital. And so far, it looks like this is easily going to be their most commercially successful album to date. And so the last question that I have is, what are the lessons to be learned here for other bands or creators or entrepreneurs, like really anybody striving to do something? What can we learn from this band? Well, for one, don't expect to be an overnight success. That's just not really how it works. Do overnight successes happen? Yeah, kind of, sort of, sometimes, maybe. But I think what's much more common is, like Ice 9 Kills, the 20-year overnight success. If you are one of those overnight successes, that's great, but don't expect that. Expect years and years of grinding it out in a van before you make it. Just like how Ice 9 Kills spent a decade in a van sleeping in the Walmart parking lot before they made it. And most importantly, the #1 thing to take away from all of this to me is the idea of make your own luck. You can say a lot of things about Ice 9 Kills, but I don't think you can say that they were lucky. If anything, you might say the opposite. They're like kind of a cursed band. There's been times in my life where I felt that way too, like I just constantly caught a bad break. Maybe you felt like that too, but here's the thing. You can't control your own luck, so it's kind of pointless to fixate on it. The one and only thing that you can actually control is how hard you work. And as they say, the harder I work, the luckier I get. Like how back in the early years of the band, they would spend 4 or 5 hours a day adding people on MySpace, building their fan base that way. When they spent weeks and weeks selling CDs to kids in the hot sun in line at Warped Tour. When Spencer sent hundreds and hundreds of emails to managers and labels and booking agents that just went straight to spam with no reply. If you have ever tried to start some kind of a creative project of some kind, that probably sounds familiar, right? I know I've been there. But here's what I want you to remember. In the moment, it may feel like you're getting nowhere, like all you're doing is just running in place, or maybe like tripping and falling flat on your face every so often. It might feel like you're not getting anywhere, but you are, I promise. And I think Ice 9 Kills is a testament to that simple truth that these days it feels like you're not supposed to say, but I know in my heart is true. Hard work always, always, always pays off. All right, my friends, that does it for this video about Ice 9 Kills. Congratulations to them for all their success. I hope they kill it with this album. As always, let me know what you think in the comments of this video. Also, join me on Twitch. I'm streaming twice a week. There's a link to that in the description. Check out the Discord if you haven't. It's pretty cool. We're up to like over 4,000 people now. Also, a link to that in the description. And as always, I want to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those of you who support us at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get every one of my podcasts a week early. There's members only channels on the Discord that I'm super active in. I do Q&As. I do some giveaways every now and then. There's also a way to have me review your music or artwork or anything else you want to get my eyes or ears on. So if any of that sounds cool to you, check out the Patreon at the link in the description below. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.